Welcome to the Climate Book Review. The Climate Book Review is a radio show and podcast featuring book reviews, author interviews, and reading lists for fiction, nonfiction, and poetry with climate themes. The Climate Book Review airs every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Central on WDBX 91.1 FM, solar-powered community radio for Southern Illinois. You can also find the show online at wdbx.org, climatebookreview.com, and on your favorite podcast app or site. The Climate Book Review is hosted by Treesong. That's me. The two main segments of the show are the Climate Book of the Week and the Climate Reading List of the Week. If you have suggestions for the show, please email us at info@climatebookreview.com. Now it's time for the Climate Book of the Week. This week's Climate Book of the Week is The Deluge by Stephen Markley. I was excited to read this one, and I'm excited to share my review with you because it was quite a wonderful book about the climate crisis. So what will the climate crisis and the world's response to it look like over the course of the next decade or two? The Deluge by Stephen Markley offers one of the most thorough and compelling answers to this question I've read to date. This novel explores almost every facet of the climate crisis in amazing and terrifying detail. Even after reading dozens of other climate fiction classics like Ministry for the Future, Termination Shock, Parable of the Sower, and others, I've found myself blown away by both the sheer scope of this novel and the many skillful ways that Markley drew me in and kept me reading throughout the entire 896-page journey. Now, that's part of why I want to review this, is if you're going to commit to 896 pages, you want to know it's worth it, and this is definitely worth it. This novel covers so much ground that it could easily be the subject of an entire semester-long course on climate fiction. Maybe I'll teach one of those someday, eh? In the meantime, since this isn't a climate fiction course, I'll narrow the focus of this review down to three themes: climate catastrophes, climate solutions, and the narrative structure of the novel. So first, the climate catastrophes. The Deluge depicts floods, droughts, wildfires, and other climate catastrophes in such vivid, multisensory detail that it feels like experiencing it firsthand. These catastrophic events build in frequency and severity over the course of the novel, creating a broadening and deepening sense of dread about both the fictional narrative and the likelihood of similar horrors unfolding in real life. It's one thing to read an article about how climate change is making certain disasters more frequent or severe. It's another thing entirely to experience these disasters through the lens of a character's point of view. At various points throughout the novel, characters find themselves wading through putrid floodwaters, traveling through massive dust storms as thick as fog, choking on wildfire smoke as flame engulfs an entire city. These scenes convey some of the most extreme and dramatic consequences of the climate crisis through vivid imagery and visceral action sequences that left me on the edge of my seat. I'm probably at some points literally, I'm reading the book in front of me because it's a heavy book resting on the table at some points. So I'm on the edge of my seat. What makes these moments of climate catastrophe even more powerful is the deeply personal context of the characters experiencing them. It's not just riveting because some big climate catastrophe is happening. It's riveting because well-developed characters find themselves in high-stakes climate disaster situations, with their lives, futures, and loved ones on the line. I also love the fact that these climate catastrophe scenes aren't just there for the sake of rattling the characters or demonstrating the extreme weather consequences of the climate crisis. They're meaningful turning points in the plot and character development arcs of the story. All of the institutional machinations and political organizing that unfold over the course of the novel directly shape and are directly shaped by these climate catastrophes. So it's not like in a blockbuster movie where they throw them in just to make it exciting. It's a vital part of the story. The author takes these many distinct stories of individual and institutional responses to the climate crisis and weaves them together seamlessly over the course of the novel into a single overarching narrative about the world's response to the climate crisis. So that brings us to the world's response, climate solutions. This brings us to one of the greatest strengths of the Deluge, its exploration of how and why diverse characters and institutions respond to the climate crisis in radically different ways. Characters in the Deluge respond to the climate crisis with an incredibly broad and realistic range of approaches. Cynical profiteering and politicking, green investment fund management, data and policy analysis, climate communication. There are just so many different ways. There's computer hacking and programming in there, personal survival strategies, the people who are just trying to survive all of these disasters, community organizing, political demonstrations, civil disobedience, popular uprisings, and even eco-terrorism. So each of the main characters in their own way offers a glimpse into the motivations and inner experiences of these people involved in one or more of these approaches. It's fascinating to get a glimpse into the lives of all these different types of characters. What's it like to be a scientist trying to warn the world about the climate crisis? What does it look like when a climate activist organizes mass demonstration campaigns across the entire country? What's life like for people living in poverty and trying to survive the economic and political instability without any political analysis? I bet a lot of people know what that one's like already, but it is fascinating to see it portrayed in fiction. What is it like profiteering off the climate crisis while telling yourself that it doesn't matter, or that your lucrative sustainable investment fund is part of the solution? What's it like when your approach to the climate crisis changes dramatically over time in response to events in your life and the world at large? This is all explored through different characters in the novel. You'd think this could be about 10 novels with all of that fit in there, but they fit it into one. Some climate fiction novels struggle to develop a deeply convincing, compelling, and complex depiction of even one or two different types of responses to the climate crisis. For example, they may feature a simplistic narrative involving a plucky protagonist, or a band of climate heroes struggling to survive these climate catastrophes, or maybe to defeat a one-dimensional climate villain. The Deluge, on the other hand, features an expansive cast of well-developed and morally complex characters, with many different and often conflicting motivations and worldviews. Therein lies some of its realism. Some of the ways that their lives intersect and interact are predictable, but there are also plenty of unexpected twists and turns along the way. Some characters have impressive redemption arcs. Some meet an untimely end as consequences of their own choices and broader social forces. Some just change over time in an organic way, with unclear or neutral impacts on their relationship with the climate crisis. And regardless of how much I love or hate a particular character, I always appreciated the glimpse into their internal motivations and felt eager to discover what happened next. That's part of the value of this novel, is seeing all of these different pieces of what is going into the climate crisis. The author also devotes a significant amount of time exploring the solutions themselves in both concrete and abstract ways. I would have liked to see more glimpses of a few of the constructive solutions, particularly the Fierce Blue Fire community hubs that combine elements of job creation, mutual aid, urban agriculture, addiction recovery, and social work resources for the low-income participants involved in the program. They lay this out there but don't really show it in great detail. But given the fact that the novel is already 896 pages long, I can see why the details of some of these solutions didn't make the cut. Even so, I did feel that each solution was presented in enough detail to make it clear what was happening, what the key details were, and why those characters involved found this particular solution more compelling than others. The characters supporting the main climate advocacy group, for example, Fierce Blue Fire, they feel an urgency that inspires them to pursue new community organizing projects and mass demonstrations that apply pressure to social power. The characters involved in 6 Degrees, the underground eco-sabotage group, they don't believe that it's possible to persuade politicians and businesses to stop fossil fuel pollution in any reasonable time frame. So they just attack the infrastructure responsible for extracting, transporting, and combusting fossil fuels. The politicians support a variety of promising climate solutions, greenwashing schemes, and in some cases openly authoritarian and fascist policies, depending on the ebb and flow of the political expediency and the whims of their base and donors. Some of the financial people, the wealthy fund managers, they see the unfolding crisis as a lucrative opportunity for profit, exploring a variety of investment responses ranging from maintaining questionable sustainability portfolios to openly profiting off of all of that climate chaos without any moral compunction about what they're doing. Since these characters disagree wildly about the morality and benefits of these solutions, the reader is largely left to draw their own conclusions about what solutions might be more desirable to support, both in the story and in real life. That's one of the things I love about this novel, is getting the glimpse into all of these different solutions and all the people pursuing them. And you figure out yourself what you think about all of that. Now, the most extreme solutions on either end of the spectrum are ultimately portrayed negatively and get a little two-dimensional at some points, but usually not to the point of eliminating the moral complexity of the characters pursuing those solutions. So even if a solution seems like a really bad idea to the reader, it is still clear why the character would go in that direction. I also appreciated how the author handled partisan politics. Both of the major parties in the U.S., the Democrats and the Republicans, contribute to climate solutions in the novel in different ways. The Republicans are portrayed as the most unhinged and overtly destructive of the two, but both parties are portrayed pursuing climate solutions and also making major missteps with horrific consequences. This complexity of partisan dynamics allows the novel to explore the ups and downs of many different responses to the climate crisis, without coming off as a partisan screed for or against either of the two dominant U.S. parties, or any particular climate solutions. That's a recurring theme, is figuring out how to pursue climate solutions in a highly partisan landscape. And speaking of U.S. politics, the plot does focus almost exclusively on characters and events in the United States, but it periodically speaks to what's happening in other parts of the world. This was an effective way for the author living in the United States and writing a story primarily set in the United States to handle that interplay between national and international responses to the climate crisis. There was enough detail about what was going on in the rest of the world to convey the global nature of the crisis without having to add another 800 plus pages of text, and likely some inaccuracies, by doing a deeper dive into the climate crisis in other countries. So I was glad they at least touched on what was happening in other countries, but did not feel like they left out things by staying in this country. That just happened to be the focus of this novel. So some more about the structure of this novel. It starts by introducing each of the main characters in their respective contexts before the onset of the main action of the story. These initial chapters of the first section establish both the characters themselves and the initial conditions that ultimately launch each of them on their individual responses to the climate crisis. Now, I love this novel, but I will admit there were times in that first section where I found myself wondering why we were exploring these characters, because the climate connection isn't clear yet. I also wondered why these stories were being presented in such a variety of styles and perspectives. From an author point, this is very fascinating to me. There were point of view shifts between first, second, and third person, depending on this character. There were also style shifts from just traditional text to including sidebars, pages full of news headlines in different fonts and sizes, and there were even chapters that were meant to be news articles or op-ed pieces set within the fictional setting. So there's a lot going on, a lot of different writing styles within one novel. Some of these characters have obvious connections to the climate crisis when it starts. For example, a scientist studying methane clathrates. I mean, that's got obvious connections. Others have lives and identities with no initial relationship to the climate crisis or other characters at all. So we get to see how they develop their relationship with it over time. Despite the initial oddness of this flip-flopping between different styles, points of view, and seemingly unrelated characters, each of these individual chapters was captivating enough, or in some cases unsettling enough, to keep me reading. The first chapter in particular got the novel off to such a strong start that it should carry any skeptical readers through the initial oddness of these shifts in point of view and style. And really, one of the things I love the most about this is the fruitful interplay between the utopian and dystopian elements of the story. Because so many climate stories swing hard in one direction or the other. They're either really simplistic happy tales of solutions, or they're disasters where everything is destroyed. But this finds a middle ground. Most readers would probably say that this novel skews in the dystopian direction, because it does have escalating climate catastrophes, worsening social conditions, and a multitude of messy climate solutions that for the most part don't seem to prevent the worst of the social and ecological consequences of the climate crisis. But some of the best climate fiction to date combines both the utopian and dystopian elements, and The Deluge is no exception. Over the course of the novel, some climate solutions do succeed to varying degrees, temporarily or in the long run. The action of the main characters often has dramatic impacts on the course of regional and national responses to the climate crisis. So this indicates that our agency as individuals, communities, and movements still matters. And this is an important part of whether or not a story is utopian or not, is can the characters actually change things? And the answer is definitely yes in this. It doesn't always go well, but the characters do change a lot over the course of the novel. And the near future reality presented by The Deluge is similar in important ways to my own perspective and the perspective of many climate justice advocates in recent years. Namely that the climate crisis is going to get worse before it gets better, but our actions can still have some meaningful impacts on the outcomes. So it's not the degree of utopianism you get in a superhero movie where the heroes save the world and everything's fine. But it's also not a grimdark dystopian tale like Mad Max where society has already collapsed and all you can do is survive and resist the brutal overlords who rule the wastelands. The Deluge is something in between. It's a world where society is trending in a destructive direction that can't be stopped entirely, but individual and collective action can still sometimes shift circumstances in a more livable and liberatory direction. Honestly, because it strikes this balance so well, I'd love to see it adapted to film or maybe TV to give it enough breathing room to do the full story justice. I've spent about 2,000 words on it here, and I've only touched the surface of all the topics covered in this novel. So this skillful blend of dystopianism, utopianism, and excellent writing makes The Deluge one of my new favorite works of climate fiction. If you haven't read it yet, you're invited to check it out and let me know what you think. You can email me at info@climatebookreview.com if you have feedback on this review or any requests about things you would like to hear reviewed in the future. Now it's time for our climate reading list of the week. This week's climate reading list of the week is climate justice books. Now this is such a big topic that I would like to compose a really long, like probably 50 or 100 book list of all the different books about climate justice. I'm developing a list like that, but in the meantime, I've got a few highlights that I would like to share with you. And this is all books about climate justice in some form. So what is climate justice? It's a political concept and social movement which recognizes that the climate crisis is a justice issue. The climate crisis is deeply interconnected with many social and environmental justice concerns. For example, who caused the climate crisis? Who benefits the most from the industries and activities that are causing the climate crisis? Who is harmed first and worst by the effects of the climate crisis? And who has the power to decide how our communities and societies respond to this climate crisis? The answers to all of those questions have justice implications. Reading a good book on the subject can help us to understand, talk about, and act on climate justice. So some of the titles here, we have Climate Justice, Hope, Resilience, and the Fight for a Sustainable Future by Mary Robinson. And this is former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, and she's been on a mission to work on climate justice for a while now. We've also got two titles here by Brian Tokar, who I studied with at the Institute for Social Ecology long ago. One is Toward Climate Justice, Perspectives on the Climate Crisis and Social Change by Brian Tokar. And another is Climate Justice and Community Renewal, Resistance and Grassroots Solutions. That one is edited by Brian Tokar and Tamara Gilbertson. And that one brings together the voices of many people from 5 continents who live, work, and research on the front lines of climate resistance and renewal. Other examples include Burnt, Fighting for Climate Justice by Chris Saltmarsh. This one is said to be an inspiring rallying cry for activists everywhere to work together to build a just eco-socialist future. This one says, Time is up. The climate crisis is no longer a future to be feared, but a devastating reality. And so they search how to meet that moment. Another one is What Climate Justice Means and Why We Should Care by Elizabeth Cripps. This is a philosopher, which as a philosopher myself, I appreciate hearing from philosophers on these topics, but it is very much applied philosophy, figuring out real-world problems, using clear reasoning and poignant examples, starting from irrefutable science and uncontroversial moral rules. She explores our obligations to each other and the non-human world. So some other titles we have on the subject. We have, this is a good one, Climate Change is Racist. Race, Privilege, and the Struggle for Climate Justice. We mentioned earlier that the climate crisis disproportionately affects certain populations, and a lot of that is definitely based on race, because the racial justice plus the arising of a crisis, it is very much impactful in that way. So just about every topic you can imagine, there's like an intersection between climate justice and that topic. This one from Mary Robinson, who we mentioned earlier, Climate Justice, a Man-Made Problem with a Feminist Solution. That explores climate justice from a gender perspective. And if you'd like the full list, you can email me at info@climatebookreview.com. I've got the short list there, and as I've said, I'm working on a long reading list on the subject, and I am very much open to suggestions for what to add to the long reading list and the short one. Thank you for listening to the Climate Book Review. You can find more information about this episode and show at climatebookreview.com. That includes the book of the week, the reading list, all of that is there. If you have suggestions for the show, please email us at info@climatebookreview.com. If you enjoyed this episode, you can support the show by telling your friends, giving the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast apps, and of course by donating to WDBX at wdbx.org. They're the ones keeping us on the air. Thank you to WDBX for broadcasting this and many other good shows. Thank you to Liborio Conti for the music, and to Ed Hawkins for the Warming Stripes graphic used in our logo. You can learn more about that at showyourstripes.info. And we just had the holiday to celebrate Show Your Stripes over, by the summer solstice. It's a time to share awareness of these stripes, which show the extent of global warming in the world or in your region. You can get more info on those at showyourstripes.info. Finally, thank you to everyone who is reading, writing, and taking action in response to the climate crisis. With our powers combined, we can make climate justice a reality.